it was really exciting to have been in Kyiv on Independence Day after having toured the war zone and especially the municipalities along the whole front lines, and then to come to Kyiv and to hear the President of Ukraine in his rather remarkable speech that was both patriotic and political and assertive and defensive uh, to rally the nation to stand firm and to stand with him. Uh, Certainly, a lot of the commentary in Kyiv concerns whether President Poroshenko is going to knuckle under to German and other demands concerning giving greater autonomy and actually authority to the Russian surrogates in the occupied territories. As you are aware, there is a move afoot to conduct elections there, even without the withdrawal of Russian troops and the surrender of weapons by their surrogates, the so-called separatists. This is a matter of great concern, especially to the people along the front line in Donetsk. So the president's speech tended to raise more questions than answer, and I think that a lot of that has to do not because he has the answers, but because the political process is unwinding in a way that is difficult for highly sophisticated people to monitor, much less villagers and small townspeople along the war front who have just shed so much authoritarian rule that was a part of the former Yanukovych regime. The economy of Ukraine is, in terms of its international loan obligations, is teetering on the brink, and the fact that the West is willing to provide financial assistance just barely enough to keep Ukraine out of bankruptcy, but not enough for it to be able to begin the process of recovery, is something that people in Ukraine have noticed and are concerned about. It dovetails with the West's reluctance to provide defensive lethal weapons so that Ukrainian soldiers wouldn't be so terribly exposed to Russian military attack. We're talking about drones. We're talking about anti-radar that would pick up incoming shells from Russian howitzers and be able to target the actual howitzers that were launching the missiles. So there's a lot of concern in this regard. There's a lot of concern about the elections, impending elections, as to how that will be impacted on the occupied territories, and not just. Civil society has really burst out of the ground after the Maidan Revolution and the Russian invasion. It started as a volunteer movement to support the troops and to support the refugees. And as people gathered and mobilized, they also found their political and civic voice. And today, in all the towns and villages that we visited, which included many that were occupied by the Russian surrogates and Russian troops themselves, and then liberated by Ukrainian troops, these communities are, for the first time, quite honestly, for the first time in the 24 years of Ukraine's independence and the many years of Soviet rule, actually finding their own voice and are no longer fearful of a local government that is run by clans and by the oligarchs and that are supported by Russia. This doesn't mean that many of the local governments are still a part of the old regime. They are. And the people in a lot of these towns and villages do not want elections to be held. They do not want the local elections to be held because they don't believe they have the political power to prevent graft and corruption of the electoral system. They would like for a military civilian administration to be put in place and to be run by the oblast or the provincial center. Canadians are doing so much, and their help and assistance was mentioned almost in every town and village. I have many pictures and videos of Canadian aid by the government and by the Canadian people and by Canadian Ukrainians, and it was really, really heartwarming since I traveled to Ukraine with Prime Minister Harper and with the Minister Persida and with parliamentary delegations. It's great to see the tangible support by the Canadian people. Canada can do more by being the leader. We've always called on Canada to be in the G7, in the Euro-Atlantic community, in the NATO. Canada is renowned, as Prime Minister Harper has said, the most Ukrainian country outside Ukraine, not because Ukrainians are so populous proportionally in Canada, but because Canadians truly appreciate what Ukrainian Canadians have done to build Canada, to make it the success story that it is, and the example that it is for the whole world. We really look forward to Canada launching programs that are going to be on the ground, in the villages and towns, working with the people directly, sending aid to Kyiv and then leaving it to the Ukrainian government to have it filter down to the towns and villages really needs to be supplemented with actual volunteers working with people locally, especially along the war zone. This really applies to Luhansk and Donetsk, as well as a little bit to Zaporizhia, Kherson. This is what Canada could do to actually jumpstart what's already been a revolution of dignity in those two provinces.